Welcome to the second season of Punching Cards. In these episodes, different teams of master's students who took part in a science communication course sat with experts and explored the latest insights in intelligence research.
By the Science of Intelligence Cluster in Berlin, this is Punching Cards, the podcast about all things intelligent.
Have you ever heard of the crocodile gorilla who could use 1,000 words of sign language? Attempting to teach an animal a human language. What an invaluable tool it could be for public outreach for research. But have you recently talked to an ape?
When I started to do this research, I thought this would be the most amazing thing to do because then I could finally understand them, right? I wouldn't have to interpret, but I could actually ask them. And then I got a little bit into the sign language or ape language projects. And there we have huge ethical problem because to teach apes these communicative means, you have to separate them from their mothers. And all these projects have more or less failed because after a certain age, you cannot control the ape anymore, right? They are so physically so strong. Even if they don't want to hurt you, they will.
Today, we are going to talk about intelligence. How clever are animals? How human-like can they be? Or how animal-like are humans? My name is Oskar.
And I'm Baris. We are two computer science students from TU Berlin.
And today, you will accompany us on a journey into the fascinating and complex world of intelligence.
We interviewed some knowledgeable guests to share their expertise with us to find similarities and differences between different domains of intelligence. Humans, animals, and AI.
So let's start by letting our experts introduce themselves. First, Professor Katja Liebal, Director of the LeipzigLab at the University of Leipzig.
I'm Katja Liebal. I'm a biologist by training, but I'm also kind of comparative psychologist because I work at the intersection of both fields. And I started out with getting really interested into how great apes communicate with each other and if this tells us anything about how human language has evolved.
And our second expert is Professor Alex Kacelnik, head of the Behavioural Ecology Research Group at the University of Oxford.
I'm a biologist. I'm a biologist very much at heart in the sense that my work forces me to work in contact with other disciplines and other approaches, particularly, as we will discuss later, with psychology and with economics, for example, and nowadays also with robotics. But I always do this from the perspective of trying to understand biological systems. The kind of work I've done, if I have to say, most of my life I worked on understanding the way birds take decisions.
And we ourselves are computer scientists. We are also interested in what we can learn from biology and apply it to our field. For example, in the currently very trending topic, artificial intelligence.
Right, now let's dive into our questions for this episode. How can we accurately compare animals and humans? How do we think about intelligence? And what exactly does all of this have to do with AI? So, you probably already have an opinion about how human-like animals are. Maybe you have a pet that likes to snuggle as much as you do. Or you have seen some seemingly very familiar group behavior of animals like gorillas or elephants.
Right. These things feel very similar to our own behavior. However, as we learned from our experts, these comparisons might not be as solid as we thought. For example, in psychology, it is very common to distinctly separate humans and animals. But for biologists, on the other hand, humans are just another species.
Yeah, and you might think that this is absolutely ridiculous, that humans are very definitely distinct from animals. And you aren't totally incorrect there. Even our experts mentioned that humans possess some abilities not yet seen in other animals. For example, our use of very complex spoken and written language.
Yeah. So, if we have these unique features, does that mean we are just the smartest of all animals? And that is what makes us human?
Well, you may think so, but it's not quite so easy. Many behaviors that have once been thought to be exclusively human have since also been observed in various animals, so we shouldn't be too quick in putting us humans on a pedestal.
Okay, so we need a way to compare intelligence in humans and animals. Is there a definition that covers both so that we can better talk about this?
That's a good question, and the answer has a lot more depth to it than you might think at first. Let's see what our expert Alex has to say about this.
Yeah, I always fear that this question may be asked, and then that's when I feel that I want to leave the room. At the core of many sciences, there are words that cannot be defined even by the most expert specialist in the topic, and they still work with it. We kind of know it when we see it, or we feel that we do, but we can't define it very properly. Why did intelligence first evolve? It evolved the same as other, let's call them mental traits for the moment, or psychological properties, like, say, hunger, or sex drive, or pain. These are all things that evolved to make organisms have more children than their neighbors. Basically, that's the way natural selection shapes living systems. And intelligent behavior evolved, or the capacity for intelligence, rather say, evolved to solve specific problems that some species had. And in different species, it takes different shapes.
So the answer is there's no easy definition that fits everybody.
Yes, and Katja agreed with this.
So what we usually do is we talk about more broadly about cognitive skills, and unlike in human psychology, at least that I would be aware of, very often we differentiate between social cognition and physical cognition. So basically intelligence you need when you interact in social groups or with other conspecifics or also with other species, and physical cognition when you need to solve problems in your non-living environment, tool use, stuff like this. So this is an approach we use quite frequently, but in general, in behavioral biology or comparative psychology in more general, we also talk about different kinds of intelligence. So emotional intelligence, when you need to deal with certain social situation, technical intelligence, social intelligence. So, but was never really, there are different approaches, but I've never seen really a unifying framework bringing everything together.
And just a note, when Katja is talking about conspecifics here, she means members of the same species interacting with each other.
Okay, now we know that there's no definitive answer what intelligence is. So that means, do we just pack it in and go home? Is that all?
Well, you could, but that would hardly give us any idea about how human-like animals can be, and also cut the rest of our investigation short. And we worked really hard to put some interesting stuff in here, so if I was you, maybe I'd stay around and see how our experts investigate what other animals are capable of. Thinking about intelligence and the human likeness of animals, a thing that often pops up is articles claiming that some animal species has been discovered to have the same capabilities as a child of age 5, or similar headlines. So something that we wanted to know is how studying intelligence differs when looking at animals and humans, especially children, and we asked Katja about this.
To be honest, it's easier to work with non-human great apes than with very young children. Both have a very short attention span, but as humans you need this whole language, entertainment to keep the attention. For the apes it's a little bit easier and difficult at the same time when we work with them. So they don't do this for us, right? They don't do this because they like us or because they think they contribute to something important. They know they get food. So if there's food involved, it's usually most of the, not gibbons unfortunately, but the great apes are very food motivated. So this is an easy way to make them interested in a study you do. And if they're not interested, there's nothing you can do. But at the same time, the consequence is also that you can only study certain phenomena in apes. So if you cannot use food, it's really difficult to to do something. And we have, and sometimes I think we are not very clear about this difference, because with kids, they like to get a sticker at the end. Food is tricky for human children because parents don't like this, or they don't want us to give their kids the food the kids like. So they don't. We try to do apples and stuff, and that doesn't work for the kids. So I think very often we are not very sensitive to the fact that the way how we design these experiments might also influence the outcome. And this, you said there are many studies comparing kids and chimps or other apes, and we have to be very careful what we are actually comparing. So the whole method, how we design the experiments, how we reward our participants, the setting that we interact with an ape. But when we study children, basically we interact with another conspecific. So there's a whole. This is a big issue, which it's not always possible to solve it.
To quickly recap this answer, the motivations for participating in a study differ wildly between species, which makes it important to account for these differences while designing the experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. But scientists also need to be aware that it's just not possible to study behavior that you cannot observe in an experimental context. Alex also had something to say about how and if we can compare human and animal intelligence in this way.
So I think is mistaken. Mistaken in the sense not of being false, but mistaken in the sense that it's not a good research program to start by saying, oh, this parrot is as intelligent as a 6-year-old child. That some colleagues do it because you do a particular test in which, for example, humans improve their performance with age, and you do the same test in one species, and it turns out that it fits in that scale at one particular age. But to extract from that the inference that the intelligence of the parrot is equivalent to that of a child at 6 years old is an overgeneralization that is not justifiable, because the child is doing many other things, and so is the parrot, which are not comparable on a linear scale of ages. That it doesn't make sense. You have, for example, the possibility of collecting self-report for how they experience something and what they think they motivate their behavior, even though you may not believe it, because a lot of the major decisions we take in life are not conscious. We are not consciously comparing the different parameters of, for example, other human beings to choose as our partners for life. We just do it driven by emotions and perception. But on the other hand, you get better quality data in animals because you can do experiments, for example, developmental experiments that you cannot do in humans. Or you can actually give them choices repeatedly for things which would be boring or unethical to do in humans. In humans, we don't know whether the use of tools, for example, is specified as a genetic propensity or not. We assume that things like language, that humans have a genetic propensity for producing a human language which is to some extent translatable into other languages and has some sharing of syntax between other languages. It's very debatable to what extent the commonalities exist. But all of this is theory, but you cannot do an experiment of raise humans under controlled conditions. You would never want to do it, not for logical reasons, but for ethical reasons.
Very interesting points from him. For one, of course, the realization that similar performance in a single metric doesn't mean similar capabilities across the board, but also that how we conceptualize the subjects influences the research, allowing for different study designs depending on the subject.
Yeah, definitely. And it would be nice if we could just hand a questionnaire to a gorilla or a dolphin that says, Are you capable of complex reasoning? Yes or no? But in reality, researchers have to come up with very clever ways to actually get the data they need. And another issue is that to study complex problems like this, you need to make sure that what you document is not just you thinking there is intelligent behavior there. So what we wanted to know is, how can one actually be objective about this?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most crucial questions for our field. I think we can never be 100% sure. Because, I mean, as you said, mental processes, how you cannot directly observe them, you always have to interpret behavior, and you can be wrong. And the really annoying and frustrating thing is, of course, there are experimental conditions, and then you have a control condition to rule out possible alternative explanations. But at the end, you have to use the most parsimonious explanation. And although you might know this is a very low level cognitive explanation, right? And then I think I know they can do more, or you can, I think it's not the right way to explain it, but you have to be very careful to not, as you said, we cannot basically disconnect from our own perspective. It's really, really difficult to not use human concepts and just apply them to other species.
So to be objective, one has to be skeptical and work under the assumption that the behavior they're looking for may be explained by some simpler answers that underlying intelligent behavior.
Yeah, I agree. To prove intelligence, you must also be ready to sometimes accept simpler explanations if they are more plausible.
But does that mean the human-like behavior we see in animals is just an expression of the desire to fulfill its physiological needs?
Not really, no. I think we've already developed an intuition that all of these questions require a certain nuance. Katja also emphasized that when we asked her about the value of comparing the mental processes of humans with other animals.
I think it's absolutely necessary. And to be honest, so when I started this research, I was very much motivated in knowing the cognitive skills of chimpanzees and orangutans. And now I have been working in psychology departments in Germany for quite a few years. And there I learned that other species, that it's all about humans. But even if it's only about humans, you won't understand what's special or not so special about humans until you have a frame of reference to compare human cognitive skills or apparently seemingly intelligent behaviors to other species, right?
So understanding how chimpanzees are similar to us can also teach us about humans.
Fascinating, right? Even if we're not looking at intelligence specifically, this sort of approach can result in really interesting insights. For example, when we think about the emotional life of animals.
The tricky thing is for me to say in a very specific situation, an ape experiences joy or is frustrated or afraid. I mean, of course, there are certain bodily signals I can interpret, but I can be wrong. And if they don't show it bodily, then I have no access to it, particularly if I don't want to do any invasive research, which with great apes is impossible to do. And so, again, this is another area. What we currently try is we use video footage where we study mother-infant interactions across so in humans and also other great apes. And then we try to find identical situations. So, for example, when they're being separated, or if the mother prevents the child to do something and the child responds to this. And then we compare how human babies react and how the chimpanzee babies react, for example. And then we say, okay, do they show the same bodily signals? And if yes, is the mother responding in the same way? And if yes, basically is the behavior used to basically that the child is emotionally down-regulated again. And then I can still not say, so the human baby was happy, then most likely the chimpanzee baby is also happy. But I can say, given how they behave in a certain situation, they show similar behaviors, yes or no. And I can say probably, but I can never say whether, I can never be 100% sure, or I would not be. I know people do this, and I can do this on an expressive level, then I can say how similar or different they are, but I cannot say, to be honest, I cannot say anything about the underlying emotional state. Black box.
Seems there are no easy answers, but what does that mean for our research? Is there a way to compare intelligence? Can we say if an animal is more or less human-like?
Well, I don't know if we can, but let's give it a try anyways.
All right, Now we have explored all of these different aspects of how human-like, or maybe not human-like animals are, but are we actually any closer to answering the question? And say, what about intelligence? Is it really humanity's standout factor among our evolutionary neighbors like the great apes or ancient ancestors?
I think we've learned quite a lot so far, yeah. We learned that in some aspects humans and other animals are much more alike than we may think at first, and what may be assumed to be the exclusive domain of humans shouldn't be taken for granted so easily.
We learned right at the beginning that even for veterans of the field it can be hard to give a definitive answer, because sometimes there aren't any. And even when you think you have something solid, a new discovery can throw everything into disarray. The whole topic is a slice from the scientific process, which it takes consensus, caution, and a good portion of skepticism.
Yeah, right, but what also became clear is that if we allow ourselves to take one specific aspect of the topic, like specific questions about social behavior, for example, the mother-child bond Katja talked about, or how some birds use tools, it becomes much easier to compare human and animal capabilities. And this can actually help us learn about humans as a group.
So how intelligent can an animal be? Can they be human-like eventually?
I think Alex Kacelnik put it very well in our interview, that it's better to approach this as an evolving question rather than trying to give a definitive answer.
From my perspective, we think of intelligence first when we see a great flexibility in the potential behaviors that are expressed, typically the capacity to produce complex solutions, to incorporate many parameters, that's on things. But fundamentally, if I ask myself as a biologist, why did intelligence first evolve? It evolved the same as other, let's call them mental traits for the moment, or psychological properties, like, say, hunger or sex drive or pain. These are all things that evolved to make organisms have more children than their neighbors. Basically, that's the way natural selection shapes living systems. Those that have traits, which some difference in the trait produces a difference in what we call fitness, which is the productivity across the generations, then those things become invade the population, right? And intelligent behavior evolved, or the capacity for intelligence, rather say, evolved to solve specific problems that some species had. And in different species, it takes different shapes. And to develop a single scale, which has at the top of it the human kind of ability, and at the bottom something which we perceive as being completely different, is, as I said before, is not that it's wrong. One expression that could be said is, it's not even wrong. To be wrong would be better because you could actually test it. It's just not a good research program. It's not a good way to define it, to make progress in it. So we have to call intelligence something that we can measure, we can study, and we can improve on in a similar way that the concept of gene has evolved in genetics, or the concept of, for example, a fundamental particle has evolved in physics, which new discoveries are made every day that show different properties of what at any time some people may have considered fundamental.
So what does all this have to do with computer science? As the title suggests, how do we relate this to AI?
We also asked Katja and Alex what they think about AI, considering their knowledge in biological intelligence. And comparing these two against each other might help us better understand how different forms of intelligence might express themselves.
It is a really good point, so we can see the ongoing AI boom from the eyes of two biologists. Alex briefly compared these two for us.
You may ask whether the way that a large language model is creative in its solutions is in any way similar to the way that the brain is creative when creating new linguistic compositions. And I know that the experts in the field, which I'm definitely not, differ in their assessment of this. Some of them say, oh, it's just brute force. And others say, no, it's a very similar thing. I mean, how do I know, even as we talk in this podcast, how to thread words together? What is the next word I should pronounce, which of course is unconscious work? How is the mechanism by which I attract one word and concatenate it with the previous ones and with the questions you ask in order to produce a solution? And you could say, well, we know that it involves probabilistic things. It includes things that are accessible faster because they've been together in the past. For example, in the, I know that if I say in, the is likely to come with certain probability. And that is something that large language models also use. So some of these principles of statistical composition occur.
Yeah, so as we talked about earlier, artificial intelligence has its own way of intelligence, or at least science of it. Since it seems impossible to give an all-encompassing definition of intelligence, I think it might also be right to take a closer look at AI.
Absolutely. Alex points out an interesting use case.
You can treat some of these models experimentally with different inputs the way you can treat humans or other species. And I think that would be a productive phase.
Yeah, right. Possibly using AI as a subject of experimentation is definitely an interesting point and shows that there is a basis for this comparison. I think what we can take away from this is that we can learn a lot about how we can critically think about AI by looking at how we think about animal intelligence, especially in moments where we might be very enthusiastic about some new discoveries or technologies. Urging ourselves to be more careful might help us avoid mistakes.
Today, this might not seem very important. However, as artificial systems get better at imitating humans, it could be useful to employ the careful methods from comparative psychology to understand these abilities. This approach can help us navigate this increasingly complex field. Now, today's investigation has been just a small peek into the fields of comparative psychology and behavioral biology. We urge everybody who has become curious to look at what Katja Liebal and Alex Kacelnik are working on currently. We also want to mention the further research into the many dimensions of intelligence, which can be found at the Science of Intelligence cluster, like the other episodes of this very podcast series.
The team responsible for the production of this podcast was Maximilian Alex, Paul Bergmann, Baris Colak, and Oskar Kupke. And of course, we also want to thank our experts for their time and the expertise they shared with us in the interviews.
And last but not least, thank you for listening.
You can find and follow our podcast on Spotify and Apple Music and all your favorite podcast platforms. For show notes, links to additional material, more information, and to contact us, visit www.scienceofintelligence.de/punchingcards.